My name is Joe Carroll Shelton Wallace Leewald. Uh, my name is Joe Carroll, a double name. I was named after the Miss America the year I was born, 1942. Until I got older, I always hated the name, but then it was kind of kitschy to have that name and be able to tell people how I got the name. And I actually corresponded with the woman I was named after at one point. She lived in Southern California. So that was kind of neat. But as I was growing up in Horton, Horton was a town of 1,800. My grandparents lived across the street, my maternal grandparents, Nan and Harry, and my other grandmother lived about 2.5 blocks away. And I really didn't appreciate all that. At first I thought I wanted to leave Horton. And so I tried to devise every method that I could to leave Horton.
So how old would you have been when you were conscious that you were wanting to leave Horton?
I was in junior high. And I was a big fan of movie stars and the movies, and I read a lot of magazines, and in the back of magazines there'd be these advertisements for boarding schools, and so I would right away for all these brochures on boarding schools, and I would hoard them up in my bedroom, and about once a week I would put one on my father's plate before he came down to breakfast. And they always said no, and I didn't have any concept of how much money it took to go to boarding school. So since they wouldn't send me away to boarding school, I decided maybe summer camps were the solution. So I found a summer camp in I was in band, so I found a music summer camp. Now, it wasn't musical at all. It was just, I think there were 150 kids in the high school and 115 belonged to the band. So, if you could pick up an instrument and move your fingers, you were in the band. So the first camp that I went to was in Boulder, Colorado. And I flew out of Kansas City on a prop plane. It wasn't my first flight. I'd always flown in my father's small 2- or 4-seater airplane. But this was my first flight in a big plane and by myself. So it was a big deal. And I went out there for about...
and how old would you have been when you went to this?
I was a freshman in high school.
Okay.
The summer after I was a freshman in high school. And I went out to this camp. And I enjoyed being away from Horton. And the next summer, after I was in the meantime, my brother married a very artistic woman who had attended a drama camp at the University of Kansas. And
so
she would have been...
Your brother was your only sibling.
My brother was my only sibling, and he was about almost 8 years older than I was. And so his wife was about 7 years older than I was. And she really had a lot of influence on my high school years. And for instance, I'd never eaten pizza, and she taught me how to make pizza. There was no pizza place in Horton. And so she told me about this drama camp that they had at Kansas University, which was about 35 miles away, in Lawrence, about 35 miles away from where we lived. And I went to my brother was attending Kansas University at the time. And one summer, after I had been at the music camp, the summer after my freshman year, and after I'd been at the music camp, I went down to visit them, and she told me about the drama camp and that the kids lived in the college dorms. So I walked to the college dorms, and I walked in the dorms until I found some kids that were attending the drama camp. And I talked to them, and I got really interested. And besides that, the camp was 2 months. And this would give me 2 months away from Horton. And it sounded like a lot of fun. And I became interested in drama. So, but I didn't have any background, any teaching, anything like that in drama. So, but I found out they had a music camp, and I still could play the saxophone. So the summer after my sophomore year in high school, I applied to this camp, and I got a scholarship to play in the band at the summer camp that was held at KU, and you lived in the dorms, and I would go watch the kids that were in the drama camp. And in my junior year in high school, this was still all of a quest. I always wanted to leave Horton. I thought it was too small. I thought it didn't have enough resources. And I don't know what contributed to that. When I was younger, like in grade school, every summer, my parents somehow would take us to California. And so that made me see other parts of the country and other cities that were bigger. And my mother always took me to Kansas City to shop for clothes once or twice a year. So I saw a bigger city then. But I just had this inner quest to leave. And so my junior year, we had a new teacher in my high school, Mr. Carter. And Mr. Carter, besides being an English teacher, was a drama coach. And he gave me some drama lessons, and then he put me in a lead in a high school play. And that was such a shock to me that anybody would think enough of my abilities to be on the stage, to put me in. I mean, it was just a little play, but to give me the lead. And I always thought it was going to go to, the girl that was the head of the cheerleading team, or the homecoming queen, or, somebody like that. But here was somebody that really appreciated a talent that I had discovered in myself. So he coached me to go down, and he coached me in 2 pieces to go down to apply for a scholarship at the drama camp held at Kansas University. And I remembered it for a long time, but I don't remember what the 2 things. One was funny and one was serious. And I know one had a line in it, something about daffodils and my eyes being blue, and I think that was the funny one. And then the other one was a short scene. I believe it was something from Tennessee Williams. And I got a scholarship, and I got to be in the drama camp. And I went to the drama camp that summer, and I had it was such an intellectual and emotional change for me that I just loved it. And it was very hard for me. Most kids in my class were really looking forward to their senior year. I was not, because that meant that I had to spend another year in Horton.
So let me ask you a couple questions about Horton.
Yeah.
What kind of town was Horton when you were in high school?
Horton was a town of 1,800 when I was in high school. There was a couple places to eat. There was a place called the Cottage Inn that we got. It wasn't a closed campus at lunch. We could go out for lunch. So sometimes we went to the Cottage Inn for lunch. Sometimes I took a sack lunch. Sometimes I ate in the cafeteria. One of my favorite meals in the cafeteria was fried bologna with mashed potatoes on top. And the cooks in the cafeteria were mothers of my friends. So everybody knew everybody in a small town. Downtown was a place that thought had a unique name until I realized it was called Four Corners. Well, it was just because the streets met there. And Christmas time, they put up a Christmas tree in the middle of the Four Corners, and I had either had my own car or had access to a car most of the time I was in high school.
And so Horton was a rural community,
right,
that was bordered by farms,
right,
predominantly.
Right. One of my best friends lived on a farm. I was trying to think. I didn't know too many kids that lived on the farm, but it was a rural community, and it had a rural mindset in that people thought that you would marry someone you knew in high school, and you would stay, if not in Horton, maybe in Hiawatha that was 13 miles away. Or sometimes when I was in high school, I dated. It was a big deal for me to date somebody that went to Effingham, which was, like 15 miles away. And I would say that probably most of the boys I dated that were from Effingham did actually live on a farm.
And when you went to Lawrence for this 2-month-long workshop, what was Lawrence like?
Lawrence physically was, of course, a much larger city. It was very hilly. I did a lot of walking. There was this, this huge library you could walk into and be exposed to literature that I'd never seen before. I remember the wide sidewalks in front of the buildings, the student union. We had complete access to the student union that had a big lounge on the first floor. So there was a university
in Lawrence.
Yes, there was a university.
Was Lawrence a university town?
Yes, Lawrence was where the Kansas University was located. Kansas University at the time had about 25,000 students, and I came from a town of 1,800, and the high school population was maybe 150 at the most, 125 to 150. And I met people and we lived in the college dorms. I didn't know my roommate before I got there. I didn't know anybody else that had, besides my sister-in-law, who was, had gone there at an earlier age and gone there in art. I didn't know anybody else that had ever gone there. So everything was completely new to me. And I don't use the word strange because it didn't feel strange. It felt very like I was supposed to be there. And I was on my own. I was 16 years old. I could wear as much eye makeup as I wanted to, and my mother wouldn't, didn't come down to see it while I was while I was at this camp. I had 2 dating experiences that were really unusual. The first one was a boy I knew. I'd asked. They had like a Sadie Hawkins dance, and that means that the girls asked the boys, and that was very unusual. So, and it was a dress up, it was costume, and we were and I knew this boy, and we were friends, and so we were supposed to meet at this particular place, and that was halfway between our dorms, and go to the party. And so I went to the place, and he didn't come, and finally one of the counselors came and asked me if I was Joe Carroll, and if I was waiting, I can't remember his name right now, but if I was waiting for him. I can see him. He was real tall and had blonde hair. And if I was waiting for him, and I said yes. And they said, well, this has nothing to do with you, and we don't want you to think it does, but he tried to commit suicide this afternoon, and he's in the hospital. And I was just, that was my first experience with anybody I knew that had tried to commit suicide and at such a young age. And I look back on that now, and he was from Little Rock, Arkansas, and it was 1958, and I know he went to Little Rock High, and the school had just been integrated, and he was Jewish, and it was probably a really hard time for him. I don't know. I never talked to him after that. And the other experience was I started dating a black boy. And I never really known anybody black. There weren't, I think there was one black family in Horton, but he was in drama. He was very good. He was very tall. And afterwards, I think we wrote to each other our whole senior year, about a letter a week. But I never told my mother he was black. And so about the time I graduated from high school, I went to the after I graduated from high school, I went to the University of Kansas. And I thought this would be, and my parents at that same time, moved from Horton to Atchison. Now, Atchison was a town of 10,000. It was only 25 miles away, but my father was working for a company then. So I went off to college, and they moved to Atchison. And I thought I would be so completely happy going to the university. And I was so totally unprepared for the quality of the education, the fact that I had to study, that I knew my roommate, but it turned out, she was someone from camp, but it turned out it was someone who didn't like me. So there was a lot of clash. There was just a lot of clash everywhere. And I was having a horrible time adjusting. And I remember calling my parents, and this was, you didn't even have a phone in your room. The room was, there was one phone for the whole floor. And I lived in a dorm, and I lived in the semi-basement of the dorm. It was a big dorm. And the dorm held more people than there were in the town I grew up in. And I remember calling my dad. I always call my dad, not my mother. I called my dad and just crying sometime in early December. And he, it wasn't very far. It was only about 35 or 40 miles. But instead of driving down to see me, he flew down. And somehow he came to the dorm. And he said, I'll take you home. You don't have to finish the semester. And I said, no. I said, I've dropped out of a couple classes, but I'm still in a couple classes, and I'll finish this semester. So I finished the semester, and I went back to Atchison at this time, and I moved in with my parents, and I attended, for the second semester of my freshman year, I attended Catholic girls' school in Atchison, where I was very comfortable. I got along with the nuns very well, but I was still looking for a way to escape. I thought at first it was Horton, but then I realized it was the whole Kansas thing I wanted to leave, or I thought I wanted to leave. So a nun, and I was still very interested in drama, and I took some drama classes. I directed a little play at Mount St. Scholastica was the name of the college. And a nun who was from New York City, who was taking a sabbatical that summer at her home on Long Island, her parents' home on Long Island, wanted to take me back to New York so I could see the plays and get more interested, more of a background in theater. But my mother wouldn't go, because my mother wouldn't let me go, because I had been raised, my mother had been raised Catholic, and she was afraid that the nun would convert me to Catholicism, so she wouldn't let me go. So I got married the following fall. I lived in Atchison for about 8 years. I had 2 children. It was kind of ironic. I lived just a couple doors down from my parents. But I still wanted to leave, and I was convincing my husband, Bruce, that we needed to leave this area where our parents were. So he had a job in Atchison, and we owned a restaurant that someone else ran at the time, but we still owned it. And so I convinced my husband that the only way that we could leave Atchison was if we sold the house we were in and moved in to another house we owned, which we had been renting, and it was not rented at the time because this house was bigger, and I thought we'd have more trouble selling it. And the first step, I believe, was that we had to sell the house in order to leave the area. So he said we had paid. This was about 1970. We had paid about $13,000 for the house. He said, if you find somebody that will buy it for $26,000, I'll sell the house, and we'll move into the little house. And I did. I found somebody. We sold. I arranged for a yard sale. We sold a lot of our furniture so we can move into the little house. And I'd say it was a good year later that my husband found work in Mississippi, and I finally was able to leave the area, and I never looked back about leaving the area. Do you think that's okay?